Catholic Answers Live. Welcome to Monday after the Chiefs' victory edition of Open Forum. What do we call it? Do we call it Open Forum?
We do.
Yeah, we do. See, all right. 888-318-7884. My name is Chris Check. I'm president of Catholic Answers. If you can't tell already, I am not the regular host of the show. CALive is. He's much better at it, but he's taking a much-needed rest after our radio drive last week. The good news is I don't have to do all the heavy lifting today. Actually, I never do. I have a staff that does that. 888-318-7884. 888-31-TRUTH to speak to today's guest, who is the reason why we are wearing Kansas City regalia. Is that what the word is?
Yeah, that's a good term for it.
Joe Heschmeyer from Kansas City.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I brought extra to make sure, in case you were deprived,
yes,
that you'd be able to wear Chief stuff on the show.
So I am wearing, those of you watching on Facebook and YouTube and at Catholic.com.
And just to give a little insider note, we normally try not to brand for things, but Darren Delosier, who is currently wearing a Chiefs hat, is the guy in charge of enforcing that rule, and he's also from Kansas City. So, who watches the Watchmen?
Yeah, I feel like a monk with the hood on this thing. This is
Chris is discovering hoodies as listeners speak.
Is that what they're called? Hoodies? Is that?
Yeah.
No, it's got
the weather down here is so warm.
I look like a Franciscan, like a red Franciscan or something, like a Christmas Franciscan here, whatever. Anyway.
So speaking of, okay, this is slightly off topic, but given the topic,
you and I set you up with the best segues.
Yeah. You know where Capuchin monkeys get their name, right?
Capuchin. Oh, from cappuccino. Oh, well, I mean, that's where cappuccino comes from.
And Capuchin monkeys both get their name from the monks.
Right, because of the brown colored habit.
Yeah, and so I love that we once lived in a world so religious that people thought, oh, yeah, that brown thing vaguely looks like a monk's habit. We're going to name this drink and this animal after the monk. It's something kind of beautiful about the worldview.
Well, I mean, you just, yes, and of course, even more deliberate than that, the entire political map of the great state of California is, the fingerprints of Junipero Serra.
Yes.
all the great cities of California are named for where once were, well, still are, California missions.
So growing up deep in the middle of the country, where English is very much the only language, it took me an embarrassing long time to realize all the San this and Santa that is like just saint names. It's like, oh yeah, of course, Santa Barbara is Saint Barbara.
And then, of course, there are really wonderful parts of the Midwest, especially, I think, they'll probably the East Coast certainly, where you get a lot of town names that have a very Old Testament quality.
Oh, yes.
Like Zion.
Yes,
Zion,
exactly.
Illinois, I think of, but there are many. Anyway, my guest, I am Chris Check, president of Catholic Answers, sitting in for CALive. My guest, staff apologist Joe Heschmeyer, and here he is in San Diego for a couple more days. And then, Joe, you and I will be back together in Kansas City on Thursday.
Yeah, more on the Kansas City theme.
I am giving a talk for all of you within, 1,000-mile radius of Kansas City.
Seems like a reasonable drive. Look, we're coming from California. If you're coming from closer than that, you can hardly complain about the drive.
I am giving a talk at the Chesterton Academy in Kansas City, and it's what is the name of it? Is that Philip Neary? Wait,
that's a good question.
Who's their patron?
I believe it is Philip Neary.
I was going to do a shout out for them, and now I can't.
Well, we'll look 70% sure it's Philip Neary.
Chesterton Academy, Kansas City. There's only one of them, and I'll be speaking there.
I know it's at like 40th and Washington. So if anyone who knows Kansas City, there you go.
And the talk is free. 888-318-7884. The other thing that I wanted to tell you, Joe Heschmeyer, is my Siri is Australian, and she calls you Joe Heschmeyer.
Yeah, I get a lot of automated devices don't do great with Heschmeyer.
Joe Heschmeyer. She also calls Jimmy Ucken.
So I think when we talk about whether AI has intelligence, we should factor those things in.
Oh, yeah.
Although if that's the standard, I mispronounce names pretty embarrassingly badly myself.
I use an Australian Siri. Do you know why?
No.
Well, I was with my friend William Fahey, who's the president of Thomas More College, Thomas More College of Liberal Arts in New Hampshire, and he had an Irish Siri, which I loved.
Yeah.
But because my wife's of Irish descent. No, I just love the sound of her voice. That's terrible. But in any case, you have to pay for Irish Siri.
What?
Yeah, but Australian Siri is free.
Wait,
I had no
why
idea
is that?
why, so I just went with Australian.
I don't know the whole Coriolis thing, but are they giving you left turns when it should be right and vice versa? The Siri's telling you to go on the other
that's
side
good.
of the road?
But I do go to the car park. Turn right.
There you go.
And also, not stoplight, traffic lights, plural, traffic lights.
Well, that's not wrong.
There are three of them.
It's true.
The traffic lights.
Wow. I wonder if it would be different if it was just like a flashing yellow. That would just be traffic light.
Right. Yeah, but I don't know the serious.
Although I found, speaking of weird variations locally, people say signal here. No one in the rest of the country, as far as I know.
Traffic signal?
Yeah, like when you get up to the signal, it'll take a left. It sounds so weird to me.
Wait a minute. When were you even getting directions?
My wife is a native Californian, and so she uses Signal, and I've heard other Californians use Signal.
Signal.
Yeah.
That I have not heard, but of course the one that you do hear all the time is the use of the definite article with interstates.
Of course, the 5. You never just say 5.
Yeah, the 15.
Yeah.
Or even not necessarily in interstates, the 52.
It was a small victory in the marriage when my wife stopped referring to 435 as the 435. Because it sounded very bizarre.
But when you move back here to Southern California,
Yeah.
Joe, that will pick back up.
Yeah,
and
she
will do
said,
it.
get on 15, and then you could actually hear her kick herself because she'd accidentally dropped
She
the
missed the chance to use the definite article.
That was like the second biggest Kansas City victory besides the one yesterday. So
888-318-7884, 888-31 Truth. The show is Catholic Answers Live. You can watch on Catholic.com. Listen on the Catholic Answers app, available at the App Store of your choice. Facebook, YouTube, open forum. Any questions about the Catholic faith? We're going to answer them. Or, Joe, if you don't know the answer, you'll make up something that sounds convincing. You'll like AI, or what's it called? What's that thing called? Chat something?
Oh, yeah, Chat GPT.
Yes. So if not, we'll just consult Chat GPT.
Exactly.
Yeah. How will we know if it's Joe or Chat GPT?
Well, on the Friday show, it was not terribly hard to tell the difference between the very good robots and the humans who answered the question.
I confess to having zero interest in Chat GPT and all its other forms.
Oh, well.
I like human persons.
I'll say this. It can be helpful, I think, in the brainstorming phase. Now, I have not used it this way, but as I'm trying to kind of like discern the potential uses of the device, having something where you could say, what are some good arguments for X? And then not just taking that and plagiarizing it, but using that as almost an idea board to then build in a human way off of it. I could see that being an interesting way to go. Yeah, I could also see it being an overrated kind of flash in the pan. It's a little too soon to say.
That's where I am. 888-318-7884, Catholic Answers Live. Shall we go to questions, brother?
Let's do it.
James in Lafayette, Indiana, listening on God Bless You, Brother, the Catholic Answers Live app. Welcome to the program. James,
hey,
you're on. Yeah, go for it.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
All right. So a little quick background. I'm a Protestant pastor, or former Protestant pastor. I'm still technically a pastor, but I'm no longer serving in a church. And my wife and I have been discerning conversion to Catholicism.
Glory.
And through my reading, I've gotten to this. I've gotten to where the papacy seems to be the last thing that I kind of need to figure out. And I'm really hung up on this one thing that comes from the documents of the First Vatican Council, Session 4, Chapter 2, where it says the papacy has been known in every age.
Yeah.
And so kind of like the Vincentian canon, I've been looking at the Church Fathers and saying, okay, if this goes all the way back, then it's an innovation to reject it, and therefore it's heretical to reject it. So my big issue right now is the controversy between Pope Stephen I and Cyprian of Carthage, because all of my Protestant friends are saying that Cyprian's Seventh Council of Carthage directly opposes Pope Stephen, and that proves that there is no papal primacy. But I'm also being told from other sources that Cyprian, recants the Seventh Council of Carthage, and he returns to Rome in his later years. And I'm just wondering if there's any evidence for that. I don't know if I'm looking in the wrong places, but there doesn't seem to be anything I can find that says Cyprian kind of recanted and said, I'm sorry, Stephen, I wanna make amends, kind of. Is there any evidence for that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah,
So,
James, it's providential because you got the author of Pope Peter right
yeah,
here
in
on
fact,
the phone.
so we will send you a copy of my book, Pope Peter, that's looking at the role Peter has among the apostles. But to say, when we talk about the papacy in every age, we include in this the apostolic age. And the last chapter of that starts to get a little bit into what do we see after this. Actually, if I can send you two books. The book, The Early Church Was a Catholic Church, is another one that I've written that looks at the first 200 years of Christianity. And so I'm looking there more at, was there one bishop in every church? But some of that stuff is going to be at least tangentially related to your question. Some of the quotations from the church fathers clearly show that not only did they believe that there was one bishop in every church, but they believed that the Bishop of Rome had a special prerogative and special authority over the other bishops. Now, with all of that kind of out of the way, the controversy with Cyprian, Cyprian's early writings, St. Cyprian's early writings, are very clear about the role of Petrine authority, the authority of Peter. And he has a work called On the Unity of the Catholic Church, in which he's very clear that Christ builds on Peter as the rock and everything you would expect. But then, later in life, Cyprian finds himself at odds with Pope Stephen on how rigorous to be towards people who've fallen into mortal sin and want to come back. Now, I'd say as an aside that Catholics, and I think most or all Protestants, would agree with Stephen and not Cyprian, that Cyprian is being overly rigorous. He is actually wrong on this question. But the Protestants appealing to him don't seem to notice that he's wrong. They just notice that he's in conflict with the Pope. And I would just say to anyone who's reading the news today, it's possible to affirm everything a Catholic affirms about the papacy and still struggle with a particular pope as a living human being. That just like you can believe that your boss is your boss or your parents are your parents and you owe them a certain respect, or the president is the president, and still bristle under their authority, still bristle when they may do something imprudent or something you just disagree with. That's normal. So, with that said, I don't think there's an actual contradiction between early and late Cyprian. I think there's a change in emphasis, but I don't think he doesn't go into schism. It's a myth that he goes into schism. The part that's allegedly anti-papal is, like you said, in the Seventh Council that he presides over. He talks about how there's no bishop of bishops, but that's not like the Seventh Synod of Carthage says there's no bishop of bishops. That the Pope's role is not to be a bishop of the bishops. He's to be a servant of the servants of God, but he is the Bishop of Rome. And so it does reject a certain exaggerated vision of the papacy, but the Catholic Church would agree with that. That the role or the relationship between the Pope and the bishops of the world is not the same as the relationship between the bishops and the priests of his diocese, or between the bishop and the laity of his diocese. The Pope is not the bishop of the bishops. So the Seventh Synod of Carthage is right about that, and the Catholic Church agrees. But on the particular issue that was leading to this kind of back and forth between Stephen and Carthage, between Stephen and Cyprian, St. Cyprian is actually in the wrong. So I think that would be what I would say to that. But maybe to the broader point, if I can return to that, do we see the papacy in every age? Well, even before this controversy, we see Irenaeus, St. Irenaeus of Lyon. And I don't know if you've looked at this yet or not, but in Against Heresies, Book 3, Chapter 3, Irenaeus, who is writing in 180, he got Christianity from St. Polycarp, who got it from the Apostle John, talks about the necessity for every church to agree with the Church of Rome. And he uses that language very explicitly. He says it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church on account of its preeminent authority. And he says that as someone who came from the East and then was serving as a bishop in France. And he doesn't say you have to agree with the church in France. He doesn't say you have to agree with the church in Smyrna, which is where he's from. He says you have to agree with the Church of Rome. And that authority, that whatever the Roman Church says is binding in terms of faith and morals, that's everything you would need to believe in terms of what Vatican I teaches.
How about that, James?
That was good. That was That's very helpful. I would just like to say, Joe, I already have the early church with the Catholic Church, so you don't really need to send that to me. It's
I'm
already on my
unsending you that one, but we will send you Pope Peter.
Okay, thank you, guys.
James, before I let you go, you've probably thought of this already, and maybe you're in touch with them. But long ago, when Marcus Grodi founded the Coming Home Network, it was for men in particular in your situation who were Protestant pastors who were going to, suffer real loss, whether it be financial or in terms of friends or both, and at expense to their families. And that was his inspiration and motivation behind founding Coming Home Network. So if you're not in touch with them, at a minimum, just for some good moral support, I encourage you to be in touch with Coming Home Network.
Well, I had a friend tell me about them a while ago, and the way he described it was for Protestant pastors in the process of converting or who had converted, who needed a job. And I think I've put it off connecting with them because I'm in a good spot where I have a good financial means other than ministry.
Right.
But if they provide more, I'll definitely look into it.
I would reach out to them and just find out and see. I mean, it is an apostolate of broader scope. Of course, there's the TV program now where all kinds of people are interviewed about their journey to the Catholic faith or return to the Catholic faith, and it's really wonderful. Now Marcus's son, of course, runs the show, but give him a call and see, and of course also if there's any way that we can be of service to you in this journey for you and your family, or if you want to talk to one of the apologists privately, shoot an email to radio@catholic.com and we'll set you up.
All right. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right. God bless you, brother. 888-318-7884. Chris Check sitting in for Cy Kellett. My guest is Joe Heschmeyer.
You seemed a little hesitant on remembering the name.
Okay. I was multitasking there, brother. My guest is Joe Heschmeyer, staff apologist at Catholic Answers and host of the brand new podcast, Shameless Popery. A witty and entertaining podcast. Oh, did you write this text?
You would think I did, but no.
That informs you about the Catholic faith and equips you to better explain Catholicism, especially to Protestant or atheist friends. New episodes drop every Thursday. For more information and to subscribe to Shameless Popery, visit shamelessjoe.com. Right back after this.
Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Save the date. Saturday, August 26th is the day, and Birmingham, Alabama is the place for the 2023 EWTN Family Celebration. We're celebrating Mother Angelica's love for the Eucharist, and join us to mark the centennial year of Mother's birth. Make your plans now to attend this free event. More details coming soon at our Family Celebration webpage, EWTN.com/Family Celebration.
Catholic Answers Live. My name is Chris Check. I'm president at Catholic Answers. I'm sitting in for the more talented and better looking Cy Kellett, who is taking a much-needed break after our fundraiser. I want to say thank you to everybody who helped out with our quarterly radio drive last week. That's it. The whole staff is involved in that, but special thanks to Cy because he's behind this mic for 6 hours in a row, asking you for your support in earnest, and I'm glad that he's able to take a little bit of break after that. So happy to sit in for him. 888-318-7884. My guest, Joe Heschmeyer. Joe, before we go to calls, I note on your wrist there, on your right wrist, the chain, which is the indication of your consecration to Jesus through Mary. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about that devotion here in a second, but I want to say that I've never done it. And I, many years ago, was invited to, by the great Bill Maher, God rest his soul, And he said to me it was a talk he was giving at a conference that I was the MC for long before I came to Catholic Answers. I don't know, it was 25 years ago or something. And he says, and on that last day, this is Bill Maher, and on that last day, he's a very cheerful guy. On that last day, when you make that final consecration, you got to say those words and you got to really mean them. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can never do this because how am I going to know if am I really meaning them or not or whatever? But
how did you get married?
Well.
You're like, do I really? I mean, I guess I do.
Yeah, well, that's okay, very good, Joe. But 32 years later, I guess I meant it. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so one day at a time. That's funny because you and I were having some funny conversation with Thomas about getting married.
Yes.
But we'll come to that later. So there I was in Los Angeles about. I don't know. It was in December, maybe, at a conference that Valerie Staples had been instrumental in setting up called Consecrate California, and Bobby Angel and Jackie Francois were there, and they gave a wonderful talk. And at the end of it, they say, "Do the consecration of Jesus through Mary." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's Bill Maher 30 years later. I have to do this." So I'm gonna do it, starting on the 20th.
You're now publicly on record.
I am. I'm going to do that. And by the way, Siobhan, my EA executive assistant, is going to do it. Best executive assistant in the world. And also, I think we've corralled about 15 people here in the building.
Praise God.
So I want to issue an invitation. So we're starting February 20 and ending on the 25th. Annunciation. I want to invite anyone who's listening, whether you've done it before, maybe you renew it, or if you've never done it. Here I am, 57 years old. I never have done it. I'm going to. Join us. We're using the translation written by Father Hugh Gillespie from De Montfort Press. It doesn't look too intimidating. And just an invitation there to all of our listeners, if you'd like to join us in the total consecration to Jesus through Mary from Saint Louis de Montfort.
And if we could, if this isn't going to totally inundate radio, if you decide to do it, send just a little note to, is it radio@catholic.com?
Yep.
I'd love to get a sense of just how many people say yes to this. And I think it'd be kind of cool to know. Here, you're walking with people around the country, around the world, as we do this together.
Yeah, glory. Good. All right, let's see if we can get another question in before the break. Joseph in Canada, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Hello?
Yeah,
Hello.
You're on, Joseph.
Oh, hi. I'm talking with a friend, and we're discussing the topic of schism.
Mm-hmm.
And I researched it and told him what canon law had to say on the matter. But he says that that's not enough. From his understanding, it's not recognizing the legitimacy of a pope or of a bishop or a priest, or not recognizing the lay status of someone, like they're not really baptized. Would that be correct? Is it more than just refusal of being subject to the Roman Pontiff and communion with, and not wanting communion with lawful Catholics, or is it more than that, or is it less than that?
Can I ask a clarifying question here? So, according to him, if you didn't know if a particular person had holy orders or not, that would make you schismatic? Am I understanding that right?
No, he believes that our definition, or at least canon law's definition of schism, isn't exactly accurate.
Right. But I'm saying, what is his? I'm not understanding the recognizing statuses part. It sounded like was in his definition.
No, this is just his talk. He's very interested in this topic. I don't know particularly why, but he's been drumming the ideas off of me, and I just don't know how to respond.
Okay. So I think that's a good starting place. So I know you already know because you just quoted it, but for those who aren't familiar, canon law in Canon 751 defines schism as the refusal of submission to the Supreme Pontiff, that's the Pope, or communion with the members of the church subject to him. So if you refuse to kind of fall under the authority of the Pope or refuse to be in communion with Catholics, that's what schism is. That's more descriptive than it is definitional in some sense. So the word schism comes from the Greek word to split. This is, if you know words like schizophrenic, it means like a split mind. So schism is to tear or to split. And there's a really beautiful depiction of this in John 21. John 21, without going too deep into this, I mentioned this in my book, Pope Peter, so I'll actually send you a copy of this. Peter's got this role where when they see Jesus, this is the last of the resurrection miracles depicted in the Gospel of John. Peter's going fishing, and 6 other apostles say, "We will go with you." And now that's a significant detail by itself, because it shows the authority of the Pope and authority of the bishops. Although you know what? I hear the music now. I will return to your question after we get back from the hard break. So we'll put a pin in this, and we'll come back to it soon.
888-318-7884, Catholic Answers Live, right back after this.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Catholic Answers Live. Chris Check sitting in for Cy Kellett. My guest, super apologist Joe Heschmeyer. Joe, you were answering a question for our Canadian friend Joseph about the meaning of the word schism.
Yes.
Or as you say, schism.
Yes. You know what? I do see an H there and a C.
Yeah,
So,
well,
do you say
I know it.
Sewell?
I know it looks like schism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is America. Well, or Canada, depending on where you're listening.
Well, Canada's part of America.
Yeah. If the War of 1812 had gone a little different.
I think recently our airplanes shot something down over Canadian airspace.
Yes. Yeah. Although after seeing the U2 ad during the Super Bowl, I'm beginning to wonder if it wasn't a giant promotional stunt.
Oh, yeah.
They just launched some balloons.
Oh.
So, anyway.
All right, Joseph,
John
we're going to
21.
give you a serious answer,
Yes.
brother.
John 21. This is the last of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. And it begins with 7 apostles going out. Simon Peter says, I am going fishing. The other 6 say, we will go with you. Now, 2 things are important there. 1, 7 is the number of completion. This has an eschatological dimension. St. Augustine argues that this last chapter is not trying to show us that Jesus really did rise from the dead. John 20 was doing that. John 21 is trying to show us something about the nature of the church on its journey towards eternity. And it involves the Pope in this role of fishing, to be a fisher of men. That's this Petrine office. And the other bishops fishing with him, not separately, not with their own nets. But the great net of the church, Matthew 13, is one, it's singular. And there's a miraculous catch of fish, so much so that the 7 are unable to bring the net in. But then when they get to shore, Jesus says, bring some of the fish that you've just caught. So we're told in John 21, verse 11, that Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore. So he does single-handedly what the 7 of them were unable to do without divine aid. With divine aid, Peter's able to do it single-handedly, and we're told that although he brings them this net full of fish, the net was not torn, and the word there is the same Greek word for schism. So the net isn't torn. The net of the church doesn't go into schism under the kind of authority of Peter at our Lord's command. That if you understand that, then you realize why the submission to the Supreme Pontiff is actually a really important part of understanding what schism is. That it's not just this group of Christians disagrees with that one. There's that famous, possibly apocryphal newspaper headline that says, weather in the Channel, mainland cut off. The joke being like, if the English Channel has bad weather, do we say England is cut off from Europe or that Europe is cut off from England? Do you lose an arm or does your arm lose a body? You could argue it in either direction, right? One of those directions being a little more silly than the other. Well, the idea is that if two groups of Christians go into schism with each other, these schismatic ones are the ones who are no longer under submission of the Supreme Pontiff. So it's not just disagreement, but it's disagreement in a particular direction. As you're breaking away from authority of the Pope, if you're breaking away from communion with the Pope and those in communion with the Pope, that's the telltale giveaway that you've got into schism.
How's that, Joseph?
I think that's beautiful. The only problem is he seems to say, okay, well, then what's the difference between disobedience and schism? He's arguing that from his understanding, schism is to actually count as no value, like you don't even have an office. I'm not listening to you, even if you say something good. But if you merely disobey, that's not necessarily schism. He likes to talk about the SSPX a lot. I think he might be like a traditional Catholic, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the question here is refusal of submission, and I would argue that permits of degrees. That you could have a situation where someone outright refuses any submission, says, the Pope isn't the Pope, and the like, outright refuses communion. But you can also have a trajectory in a particular direction, which is why in the case of like the SSPX, you will find Catholics who disagree over whether schism is the proper term or not, because there's certainly some degree of recognition of the Pope and his authority, and some degree of refusal to submit to the Pope's authority despite recognizing it. So how you kind of weigh that up is why it's difficult. Just like it's difficult to call somebody else a heretic, because heresy, as the same canon points out, is an obstinate denial or obstinate doubt about a matter of the faith. Well, how can I say if your denial or doubt is obstinate? Apostasy is a total repudiation. How do I know if your repudiation is total? Well, likewise, schism is a refusal of submission. So there's extreme cases that are really easy to tell, but there are other cases where it may be a little more gray. So judging our neighbor is obviously very hard, and fortunately, we're not called to do that. But we can say for ourselves, well, do I have an attitude of submission to the authority of the church, to the Pope? Do I have an attitude of communion with the members of the church? And if the answer to that is no, or yes with a ton of caveats, well, I know what kind of work I need to do.
Joseph, on the particular question of the society, the Priestly Society of Pius X, there are two podcasts, 2 episodes of Catholic Answers Focus that you can find on Catholic.com featuring Father Hugh Barber and James Vogel, who is actually a spokesman for the SSPX, to help unwind that exceedingly thorny issue. And that may be of some help to your friend. We do need to move on. Joe Heschmeyer, schism is a sin against charity, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, because
we would think it ought to be a sin against faith, but it's a sin against charity.
Right. Think about like 1 Corinthians 1. You've got all this infighting of different factions. And relatedly, John 17, where Jesus says that all should be one, so that the world can believe. That when you tear this down, when Christians are tearing one another down, when they make it harder to figure out where the faith is, that is actually harming other people.
Yes.
Not whatever the damage is to yourself directly, you're actually hurting other people's ability to come to the faith.
Yeah. Well said. Tim in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, watching on Catholic.com. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Thank you. Actually, I had a simple custom question, and then I'm asked another question, if I might. The question on custom I grew up in the 50s, and I recall, because I remember having to make breakfast when I got communion at a Catholic school, that in, let's say, 57, when I can receive communion, that the fast for the Eucharist started at 12 o'clock.
Yes.
And that was changed probably in the 60s.
To 3 hours, I think. Yeah.
Yes, 3 hours for solid food, an hour for liquids, not including water, and no alcohol, never.
Right.
Well, we've never had a Catholic Pope that's from Ireland, so that's probably never going to change.
Well, we've had some Italians and some Germans. I think they drink
but
too.
My question is, she says, no, it was before that. And I was wondering whether you know what, I know in, I think it was 53, Pius II said if you're ill, you get dispensation for solid. You can take liquid. You can take liquid with still the solid. But I can't find anything that says when that changed. I know what we have now was in the code of, Canon Code of 83, I believe.
Yes.
But do you have any idea when they changed?
Yeah,
I
so
think it's
there
Pius the 12th.
were two changes. 1957, Pius XII, in a document called Sacram Communionum, on laws of fasting in the evening mass, is 1957. And then Paul VI then revised it again, and then it's now codified, as you said, in the 1983 code.
Should he make in 57?
There's several rules in 57, but it's particularly looking at the evening mass, because one of the changes was the introduction of evening masses, which hadn't been done for a long time. And so you have things like a vigil mass. So if you're going to have like the Easter vigil at 9 p.m., well, you can't have the rule be that you have to fast from midnight. And so they created a 3-hour rule for solid foods and alcoholic liquids, and 1 hour for for non-alcoholic liquids, for anything after, I believe, midday.
Okay. Yeah, because that time we didn't have at my parish. So when did they change it, period?
Paul VI changed it. I don't remember what year, and then it was codified in 1983.
Okay, and then the other question is in regards to a question from listening to your first question of the day. If my daughter-in-law is Greek Orthodox, which was better than when she was Baptist. I mean, the Greek Orthodox will let your kids be raised Catholic. But
some of them will.
Well, the most important.
What's your question, Tim?
They state that it has always been that the Pope has been the first among equals. That has always been the case between whether it was the Patriarch of Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, or Jerusalem, and that they really didn't consider the Pope as we consider him.
Right.
That's
Joe,
a very popular myth.
Yeah.
The first thing I'd say to that is the Pentarchy, you just referred to, Rome, Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, and Alexandria, is much newer than the papacy. And one of the dead giveaways is Constantinople didn't exist as a city. And so, obviously, that's newer. That was a jurisdictional question. For local bishops, if you're going to have a bishop in Turkey, well, Constantinople's right there. So if you're trying to figure out who the best candidate is for the bishop, well, the local patriarch should figure that out. That is prudential. That can and did change in the history of the church regularly. It was not something of divine institution. In the same way that right now, the United States is split up into all sorts of different dioceses and provinces, and each province has one archbishop. And there are a lot of important questions that the archbishop has a lot of say in. But the church could change where those boundaries are. There's no divine law that says it has to be right at the state line or something like that. All of that is of human origin, and good human origin, right? Like, you want to divide things up for the good administration of the church. But don't confuse that with divine law. The giving of the keys to Peter is a matter of divine law, not human institution. And so when you read about Irenaeus talking about how every church needs to agree with this church, that's much old. Constantinople doesn't exist at that time. So the idea that the Pope was just first among equals it's a myth. He always had more authority than that. And that authority was recognized long before Constantinople even exists as a city, much less as a major church.
How's that, Tim?
Worked out good. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
And if you want more depth, visit Catholic.com. I know we treat this question multiple times on the website. Amanda in Illinois, listening on Sirius Satellite Radio EWTN 130. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can
Loud
hear
and
you
clear,
loud and clear.
Amanda. What part of Illinois do you live in?
Central Illinois, like by Peoria.
Okay, so you're in the Peoria diocese.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right.
Yes.
What's your question?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to be as, clear and concise as possible. I was kind of rambling to the call screener. But my question's kind of about things that, the church doesn't have, a specific stance on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, dressing your kid up as Winnie the Pooh and going trick-or-treating, that's up for debate. It's up for your own conscience. The church doesn't say it's a mortal sin to go trick-or-treating. And so one of the topics that we were talking about recently was, Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband and I kind of don't think the same way on it. I don't really like Harry Potter. He seems to think it's okay. And he actually saw on your guys' website, on the Catholic Answers website, that it says that the church doesn't specifically forbid the series. And when I mentioned that to another family member, they said, oh, no, Catholic Answers has that wrong because the lead exorcist at the Vatican makes those rules, and he said that, it's not it is forbidden. So I guess my question is, what is it really with Harry Potter, but also more so, how do you know, what things, where would I go to find out that answer? What does make that call to say, you can't trick-or-treat on Halloween, or you can't read the Harry Potter series, etc.?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a really good questions. First, the friend who said Catholic Answers was wrong is mistaken. And specifically, there's no one who's
we don't have any special charism or guarantee, but in this case, your friend is mistaken.
Right. It's not just automatic. There are times where your friend might be right. Yeah. But in this case, there's no exorcist of the Vatican whose job is approving or not approving of literature. That's not a thing that exists.
No.
In the past, the church had an index of forbidden books. Doesn't have that anymore. So there's not a banned book list. And even when that existed, an exorcist wasn't in charge of running that. And so that's a mistake. There may be an exorcist. There was an exorcist at the Vatican who did not like Harry Potter and spoke out against it. But that is one priest's opinion, one exorcist who was controversial for a lot of reasons. Now, you can agree or disagree with that, but it doesn't carry any more official weight than if your local priest says, I like or don't like Harry Potter or anyone else. It doesn't automatically, just because they live at the Vatican, doesn't give them, they don't catch infallibility in the water or anything like that.
No, indeed.
As anyone following church news would know. So that'd be the first. So that's not something the church has taken a position on. The second is, most of the time, when someone is claiming there's a restriction, you should ask them, can you show me where the church officially bans this? It can't just be this person doesn't like it, that person doesn't like it. And the reason is really simple. Spiritually, you don't want to bind heavy burdens for others to carry. Jesus condemns that. This is what the Pharisees did. Now, you can live by a really hard code if you want to. You can't force your neighbor to live by a really hard code. Now, nevertheless, we can give a few general spiritual rules. And Scripture gives these. So if it's good and beautiful, if it's uplifting, dwell on that. And so if something is making you have a corrupted vision of the world, then steer clear of it. So and two people may not react to it in the same way. One person may read the Harry Potter books, and their takeaway is that evil really exists and that we need to strive for good. Another person may take away a fascination with magic and go in a very different, more like a cult direction. As a parent, you should say, well, what are my kids, how are they reacting to this? In the same way that, the Lord of the Rings, beautiful, very Catholic-infused series. But someone could read those books, watch those movies, and come away missing the entire moral of it and just focus on the magic. You could do that with Chronicles of Narnia. Same thing. It's very Christian-infused, but you could focus on the fantasy elements in an unhealthy kind of way. And so that's just where I think being a well-formed Catholic parent is going to be of more importance in terms of what's good and bad for your kids than any kind of imaginary list prohibiting, because one doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist, I think, for good reason.
Is that helpful, Amanda?
That is. Thank you very much.
Good.
Call back anytime. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. My friends, if you are a supporter of Catholic Answers, then you get for free 6 times a year Catholic Answers magazine, which is still in print. And the magazine, the new edition of the magazine, of course, or I should say the new format of the magazine includes a lot of news about the apostolate. So we know, for example, when Joe Heschmeyer's beautiful wife, Anna, is expecting her 3rd child. Yes. Although I don't think we'll have to do that article soon. Yeah.
Yes.
So
we'll see if her family is listening in, I guess, on the show.
If you want to keep on good apologetics and evangelization content, and also on what's going on at Catholic Answers, become a donor to Catholic Answers and receive Catholic Answers magazine. Also, my friends, check out our new blog at Catholic.com. called Indulgences. Indulgences, get it, Joe?
I do. I'll indulge this, Joe.
Indulgences gives those of us here who wish they had time to write something of 1,000 words or more, 200 words, little short takes on what's going on in the world, curated by our own social media guru, Thomas Graff.
These posts, by the way, are free. You do not have to buy these indulgences.
Oh yeah, like the really good kind that you have to buy, right? No, so we're gonna get a call from EWTN here.
You guys are off.
You don't have to buy
Yes.
indulgences, my friends.
Not only do you not have to, it is forbidden to.
That's right, to sell them. Yeah. So I have an entry that I put up at the end of last week called Bloody Reminders on the feast of Jose Sanchez del Rio, one of the martyrs of the Cristero War. So check that out. 888-318-7884, Catholic Answers Live, right back after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
I just want to share that 5 years ago, my lovely warrior princess and saint of a wife and I decided to adopt a little girl through foster care. She is the perfect roundout of our family of 3 boys and her. Yes, there are challenges. Very grateful today for all the blessings that he has shown our family.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Eight 318-7884, Catholic Answers Live. Chris Check sitting in for Cy Kellett, and you can tell I am not a pro at this because apparently I spoke a little soon there, perhaps.
There may have been a family announcement made that not the whole family knows about yet.
Well, there you go.
Or didn't. We'll find out who doesn't
we'll find out who listens
show.
to Catholic Answers Live. 888-318-7884. Alba in Honduras, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Thank you.
Hi, Alba.
How can we help?
Hi. Yes, I want to understand better why did God was very direct and outright in forbidding things like sexual sin in the Moses Law, but He was not directly outlawing slavery, for instance, or stoning someone.
Sure. Very good.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's one sense of that question where
Okay.
I think. Can you hear me? I was saying there's part of that question where I would have to be God to answer that, and I can only make my best guess. And I would say this, in Matthew chapter 19, when Jesus is talking about the Mosaic divorce provisions, he says, for your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for, and then the word there is porneia, and marries another, commits adultery. And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. In other words, even in terms of sexual sin, the law of Moses is actually very gradual. It doesn't condemn every form of sexual sin immediately. It doesn't condemn every shortcoming. It condemns some of the most egregious ones. And then as people kind of develop a moral conscience, they're called to more and they're called to higher. Well, likewise with slavery, the worst abuses of slavery are called out and corrected. And only over time is slavery as such clearly presented as being incompatible with the Christian vision.
How is that, Alba?
Yes, that actually helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 888-318-7884. Catholic Answers Live. Joe, let's see how many we can get before the end of the hour. Nicholas in Providence, Rhode Island, watching on YouTube. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Good evening, gentlemen. I was just noticing something between the end of the Bible where Peter and James have some letters that are listed. I'm wondering why there isn't a larger contribution by them in the canon. You would think an apostle would have a larger proportion to it, and I don't know if there's questions with authorship, or did they surprisingly not write that much and they had other writings elsewhere? I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it actually, we can even expand on that question. Of the 12 apostles, something like 6 of them don't write anything we have. So Peter and James are actually on the more literary end of that spectrum, even though people actually the most words in the New Testament written by St. Luke. People always assume Paul because he's written the most letters, but if you look at just word count, it's Luke. I lost that as a trivia question once, so I've never forgotten it. But Luke isn't an apostle. He is a companion of Paul's, and Paul isn't one of the 12. And so that's a fascinating thing. And I would just say this is something we see throughout the history of the church. The apostles are called to the governance of the church and the building up of the church. And some of them are also called to write and do that kind of thing. Some of them are called to do kind of this public work of theology. But you see that throughout history. You see many of the great popes in history maybe wrote very little. And a lot of what they did and what they're remembered for is more the governance than it is the great writing. That there's a difference between being a bishop and a theologian. And there's a difference between being a pope and a theologian. Some popes are theologians. A lot of popes aren't. In the sense of, publicly doing work of theology, that sort of idea. But yeah, we see that going back to the first century. So it's just the mysterious way in which God gives different people different gifts for the upbuilding of the kingdom. St. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 12. And I think that's really all we can say about it, that he gives these gifts to some and not to others.
Nicholas in Providence, Rhode Island, thanks for the call. CALive, Elizabeth, Sean, we will get to you in the next hour. Chris Check sitting in for Cy Kellett, my guest, Joe Heschmeyer. Joe, your new podcast, Shameless Popery.
Yes.
Popery.
Yeah, not like the stuff you smell. Not potpourri. Is
right.
Popery.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised.
What is so? If you want to listen to Joe's podcast, go to shamelessjoe.com. What's the current episode about?
It's why I don't believe in sola scriptura.
Oh, sola scriptura, which is French for what?
Yes, exactly. It's something for by the Bible alone.
Yeah.
Baptists always using Latin.
Yeah. 888-318-7884, Catholic Answers Live. I'm Chris Check, president of Catholic Answers, sitting in for Cy Kellett, CALive, Elizabeth, Sean, everyone else. Call in the second hour. Joe will answer your questions on our special congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs episode of Catholic Answers Live. Right back in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884. Jimmy Aiken always says I say the number too quickly, Joe.
So does Tim Staples. I think it might be onto something.
Oh, Tim Staples says the number too quickly?
No, he says that we say the number too quickly. I think John has also. I think several people have said we say the number too quickly.
All right, my friends, get your pens out. Get a pen and paper. 888-318-7884. Or you can remember 888-31-TRUTH. Now, I kind of wonder about this 31 Truth, and I've never asked Carl Keating, founder of Catholic Answers, my predecessor, really brought back modern apologetics.
Yes.
I'm kind of wondering when he secured this phone number. Darren, do you know this story? Is it 3-1, Trinity 3-in-1 Truth? Yes, that's correct? Okay.
Or like the first year of Jesus' public ministry.
Oh, when he was 31.
Yeah, I mean, I wondered. I feels like it's probably one of those two things.
I'm going 3-in-1.
Yeah,
so
I think 3-in-1's good.
888-3-1-TRUTH. Catholic Answers Live. Chris Check sitting in for Cy Kellett. My guest, Joe Heschmeyer, author of "The Early Church Was the Catholic Church," and also Pope Peter.
Yes.
And also, do you have 2 books with us?
I have 2 books with you, 2 books with OSV.
OSV, is that a Catholic press?
Oh, wow.
Oh, come on.
Wow.
Actually, my dear friend Scott Richard runs the publishing arm of our Sunday Visitor.
I'm not sure if he's still your dear friend after that.
I know he is. I got a little tech. He and I used to go to Rome together when we both worked at the Rockford Institute every January, and I just got a text from him showing me these steps that go down from the Janiculum Hill. Scott loves to do this kind of stuff.
I used to live at the top of that hill.
Yeah, so he said, do you remember these steps? And there are these steps going down. And like at first I was thinking, are those the steps in Georgetown from The Exorcist? And then I looked at them more carefully and said, oh no, that's the Janiculum Hill. Anyway.
There you go.
Yeah, so no, OSV does a lot of good work. What are your books with them?
A Man Named Joseph, which is on St. Joseph, and Who Am I, Lord? Finding Your Identity in Christ.
And you have a book coming out with Catholic Answers
I
Press.
do.
Have we named it yet?
There has been a lengthy ongoing conversation about the appropriate name for it.
Oh, was Todd Aglioloro, editor of Catholic Answers Press, involved in this lengthy conversation?
He was involved in 2 separate conversations, one with me and one with marketing. And those conversations had gone in 2 different directions, and not everybody was in the room together. And so there were different names that we thought were the name. And I just belatedly discovered that the name I thought the book was called and the name marketing thought the book was called, not the same name.
So
it might be called The Eucharist is Really Jesus. It might be called something else.
Okay, so on this episode of How the Sausage is Made at Catholic Answers,
Exactly.
my guest, Joe Heschmeyer. No, open forum. Any questions about the Catholic faith? 888-318-7884. Let's go straight to calls. Enough back and forth, as our friends on Facebook would say. When's he going to get to questions?
Yes.
I had to throw that out there for my friends on Facebook. Katie in Green Bay, I'm really glad you called back, listen, because I like your question, listening on Sirius 130, EWTN, and also because I like your bishop very much. Bishop Ricken is a very first-rate man and a dear friend of Catholic Answers. He was out visiting us here, I don't know, about 6 months ago, and of course, the one approved Marian apparition north of the Rio Grande.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
How can we help, Katie?
I am calling because, and now that you just said all these wonderful things about my bishop, which he is wonderful, but I'm newly converted, right? So I've only just been like a year, so I'm learning so much, and I feel like I've just been taking in all this information, and I've gone to confession a few times, and we have a new priest, and the few times I've gone to confession, I've been really taken back because he's told me things like missing Mass isn't a sin. And things that I know in my heart are wrong, and I don't know how to address it because I went for missing Mass, and he said, stop with the guilt. He's like, missing Mass isn't a mortal sin. And I'm like, but yes, it is, isn't it? Like, this is all I've just learned, and I'm not sure what to do about it. And every time I want to go to confession, which is 30 minutes, he's the only one there.
Wow.
All right, Katie, we can help. We can help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, can I ask for a little more clarity? Is he just saying it's never a sin to miss Mass, or that the particular situations under which you're missing it?
I went to confess that I had missed Mass 3 weeks ago because I did something else with my son's wrestling match. And I said, and then I was guilty because I came back and I took communion and I learned I wasn't supposed to take communion my other 2 Sundays. And he told me both were fine.
Yeah, I think he's mistaken on that. So to be clear, it is grave matter to miss Mass, but it's not always a sin. So for instance, if there's like a horrible snowstorm, or if you're dealing with an aging parent or a sick child, or something like that, God is not a legalist. And so a person who desires to go to Mass, but for some important reason can't, is fine. They have not sinned at all. Or a person who, you live in the middle of the Amazon and it's hours on foot to get to a Mass, and you're not committing a sin in those instances. The astronauts, there have been Catholic astronauts, they're not sinning if they're in space on a Sunday. They don't have to have an emergency landing, and then it doesn't work like that. So this is part of just kind of the notion of impossibility. God never commands or expects the impossible, but it also is a recognition that the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But on the other hand, in a case like this where it sounds like you're missing for a sports game, well, God is more important than sports. And so I'm not denying the good of sports. You were right to say, I shouldn't have done that. And I applaud that. That's good moral reasoning. It sounds like there's real growth coming there. I'm saying that while wearing a Chiefs shirt, that there's things more important than sports on Sunday. And so it is unfortunate then. So I'd say the first thing is the priest, it sounds like, was mistaken. In that case, you can ask for absolution anyway. He is not absolving you just of the things he's personally convicted by. He's absolving you of the things that you're confessing. And you can just ignore bad pastoral counsel. It's not infallible. If you know that he's mistaken on something, then you should go with what you know to be correct. It's good to get pastoral counsel. It's good to listen to excerpts, but sometimes even the people in a position of authority are mistaken about that. You can still go to him for confession, but you may find it more spiritually fruitful because you get better counsel to go to somebody else. I mean, I'll give you the last confession I went to. The priest gave me no counsel. He just said, "Try to do better. Your penance is 1, Our Father," and then he gave me absolution, and that was valid. That's all it takes. So if you get good counsel, that can be really beneficial. The sacrament is still valid, even if the counsel you get is non-existent or it's bad. So don't beat yourself up over, I disagree with this priest. Go with the stuff that you know to be true. And if you find him helpful, great. And if you find him unhelpful, just continue on. And if you find a better priest in the area, feel free to go to him instead. But don't get too hung up, I think, on it. So I'm sorry you've had that experience. And it may be a situation where if it's a new priest and he's just mistaken, maybe you say something to the pastor and just say, hey, you should just be aware of this situation, so he can kind of gently correct and guide the newbie priest along.
Katie, and Joe, help. Let's clarify a little bit here. It sounds to me that the priest here was mistaken and indeed perhaps misleading, but there is a possibility that he understood that Katie didn't know about the gravity.
Oh, yeah. So that's a good point. I talked about the legitimate reasons. You can also be ignorantly innocent of a particular sin. You are not aware that you're required to go to Mass on Sunday. That's not disobedient. You haven't heard. In the same way that, if you're at work and there's a new rule at work and you don't know about it.
Right. The communion, the reception of communion, you can't be culpable for that if you did not know
that's a good point.
That it's a grave sin, and it is, to receive communion in the state of mortal sin, but your culpability depends on the gravity and your knowledge, and the third one, of course, your full consent. But you've heard those things, right, Katie?
Yeah, and I kind of thought I shouldn't be here, but then I'm like, I didn't know, and then I thought if I didn't go up, everybody else did, and I wasn't sure. All of it, but
Katie, on that last score, I can tell you, sometimes you just set a really wonderful example, especially for your kids, and you just say, you know what, I didn't get to confession. They ask you afterwards, and of course this is for everyone listening, because I think, frankly, a lot more people, more people should probably sit down and not receive than are in fact receiving. And we can all set a really good example, especially for our children. I had a great priest tell me this one time, and just say, you know what? And then afterwards let them know, look, no, I've got to go get absolution first, and then I've restored things with God. And it's a great teaching moment. So it's a good example. So never fret about that.
If I can piggyback off of that, in the Catechism section on parenting, when it talks about parents being the first teachers of the faith for their children, a lot of it is in showing humility. Mm-hmm. And it's so counterintuitive because as a parent, you never want to admit making a mistake to your kids. But I think as a former child, those moments where you knew your parents had screwed up, when they own that compared to when they pretend like they didn't and you know that they did, it's so much more convincing and so much more formative. It's really life-changing for a parent to say, yeah, I didn't do that right. Apologize to the kids, that sort of thing. But also admit, I sin and I have to go to confession. And, that sort of thing that speaks so much more loudly than a parent pretending like they're perfect, telling their kid to get their act together.
Katie, thank you so much for calling. Katie from Green Bay. I want you to know that even though Joe forcibly made me wear a Kansas City jersey sweatshirt today, it's not even mine, it's his. You can tell it's
not. You can cut his mic,
You can tell it's not mine. My team is and has been since before I could speak or write the Green Bay Packers. So I just want to say there is an opportunity for people, in fact, going to Green Bay to make two pilgrimages, if to Champion, Illinois, and to
I just wanted to point out
Lambeau Field.
That one thing you have in common with Aaron Rodgers is neither of you look particularly loyal to the Packers.
Very well. We do know that the trophy that was given yesterday was named after the great Vince Lombardi.
That's true.
A Catholic, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Katie from Green Bay. Give the great Bishop Rickon our love when you see him. 888-318-7884, Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer's new podcast, Shameless Popery. Witty, entertaining podcast that informs you about your Catholic faith and equips you to better explain Catholicism, especially to Protestants, atheists, and even to some Catholics, actually to a lot of Catholics. New episodes drop every Thursday. To subscribe to Shameless Popery, Catholic Answers' newest podcast, visit shamelessjoe.com. Catholic Answers Live right back after this.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
There is tremendous power in prayer because when we acknowledge that we don't have the power, but God does, things then begin to move for our good. Remember Matthew 19:26. But Jesus looked at them and said to them, with men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Now that's power.
Catholic Answers Live. Chris Check sitting in for CALive, Open Forum. My guest, Joe Heschmeyer. David in Peoria, Illinois, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. David, thank you for putting the app on your phone. Encourage everyone you meet to do the same. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, thank you for having me.
For sure. How can we help?
I was looking for some recommendations. I'm kind of reading my way into the church, and I'm working on the, pivot point of authority, whether it's within the church and whether that also falls under the papacy and Protestant doctrines such as sola scriptura. And I'm very familiar with sola scriptura and with the Protestant arguments for where we get the Bible from, as I was raised in that. And so I'm looking for advice on resources for where we got the Bible that are Catholic. I have access to Henry Graham's book, Where We Got the Bible,
Sure.
Our Debt to the Catholic Church. I was wondering if that's a good resource. And then also on ones that would be good for, again, Sola Scriptura, which I know you recently had a podcast come out, I just heard. So that's great.
We can help, David.
Yeah, so let's start with this. Our own Jimmy Akin has a book called The Bible is a Catholic Book that is, I think, a pretty masterful treatment of this exact subject, where I think he goes into some detail, but it's still readable, if you know what I mean. Like, there's always that balance between, like, how detailed to get. I think he does a good job of getting into the weeds without losing the reader.
It's an improvement over Graham's book.
Oh,
which is good.
Yeah. Okay.
But
there we go.
In fact, I think one of the reasons Jimmy decided to write the book is because he as much as we used to recommend Graham's book ourselves, but he said we can do something that, among other things, takes into account a lot of research that was since Graham that was not available to him at the time.
Yeah. So why don't we send you that book?
Give your address.
This is
to
an
the
important kind of idea. I'd just say maybe a couple things very generally. Actually, I'm going to send you a second book as well. My book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, has a chapter in it on how we know the four Gospels are supposed to be in the Bible. And the point that I make in the book is the exact same people who attest to the apostolic authority of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and their inspiration, people like Irenaeus, are the exact same people who are telling us that there's only one bishop per church, that the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist is a universal belief of the church, and all these things. And so a Protestant is in a very strange position to say, well, we think that they got the Bible right, but we think they misunderstood the Bible on all of these major doctrines. And it really should raise the question, well, if they're that unreliable, how do you know they were even right about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? How do you know they're right about Paul actually being the author of the Pauline epistles? Or, you see what I mean? That if you're going to say the Holy Spirit guided the process, why in the world would the Holy Spirit guide them into the right table of contents, but not guide them into the meaning of the books? That the Holy Spirit's going to make sure they get the books right, but get the books wrong. That sort of thing. So I kind of explore that question. So why don't we send you those two books and then read those, and please keep in touch. Call back with maybe the questions that raises or whatever the next question is on your journey. And, for those who are listening, maybe say a little prayer for David and for everyone else who's called in who's maybe reading their way into the church right now. Yeah,
this is great news, David. Let us know how we can help. On the justification question, by the way, when that comes up, if it hasn't already, I recommend very much to you a friend of ours who's on the program for our conference this year, Robert Coons. He teaches philosophy at University of Texas, Austin. Very keen philosophical mind. He was a Lutheran, and justification was the final hurdle that he had to overcome, and he has written extensively and also recorded extensively. So Bob Coons, Koons, on justification. Let's go to CALive, also in Illinois on 92.5 FM. CALive, welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
For sure.
And I always appreciate a little good-natured joke at the Packers. So thank you for that as well.
Okay, well, if you're a Bears fan, we've had plenty of laughs at your expense, we'll say.
Wow. This is a spicier episode of Catholic Answers Live than many listeners are used to.
Although
I
will say the family that owns the Bears are good, faithful Catholics. Yeah. CALive, how can we help?
Yes, my question, and I want to preface this by saying that I mean no disrespect, and I actually wrestled with whether to ask it, since I certainly don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I've been thinking about what it means to be the Pope in recent weeks after the death of Pope Benedict.
Yes.
My question is pretty simple. What's the theological or doctrinal significance of whether a Pope retires? Why does it matter?
Yeah.
And I say that, too, as a Protestant who has a very limited understanding of what the papacy is about.
Yeah, it's a great question, David. Well, first of all, I'd say I don't think it's a disrespectful question at all.
No.
This is something I think Benedict wrestled with himself, that you don't want to simply run away. In his very first homily as Pope, if memory serves, he said, "Pray for me that I will not run away from the wolves as I shepherd the sheep." I'm paraphrasing him there. But you don't want to, in other words, resign just because things are hard or because it's scary or because there's an authority. And you know, in the same way that a parent doesn't just say, I don't want to have kids. I better go tell the kids. Like, once you've taken on fatherhood, there's a real sense in which that's an enduring thing. But one area in which being a bishop is different than being a father is that in the modern world we have retirement ages. So as a bishop, you are expected to submit your retirement at age 75, and the Pope can accept it at his discretion. Now, there's no one the Pope submits his retirement to in the same way. It's certainly not automatically. Pope Francis is well beyond the age of 75. Benedict was as well, and John Paul II was as well. But nevertheless, there's kind of a recognition that to effectively shepherd the people of God, whether it's at the local level like a bishop or at the global level like the Pope, a man should be mentally and even to a certain extent physically capable of the role, of the task. That's a hard thing to assess, but I suspect as lifespans extend and medical technology improves, that there will probably be more popes who resign in the future because they don't feel that they're mentally prepared for what the office requires, or that they're, certainly if someone's in declining health, the question of, well, does the church need someone who's more fit, more capable of being the shepherd in this spot? That is a very difficult question to answer. And I think there's a beauty to John Paul II deciding to continue in office and allow the world sort of see him suffer and die slowly. I think there is also, I understand Benedict's reasoning as well in terms of saying it may be better for the church if I step aside and let another take the place. That's a difficult discernment, and I'm thankful to God that I'm not the one who has to make it.
Yeah,
but those are the factors that kind of go in.
What do you think, CALive?
Yeah, I thought that was a wonderful answer. Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, CALive, you asked about the theological significance, and I'd be remiss if I didn't add one detail. There's a sense in which even after a pope retires, or even after a pope dies, there's a spiritual connection that remains. And this is caught up with this idea of the communion of the saints. So, like on the liturgical calendar, when we celebrate a pope, we acknowledge them as pope. It'll be Pius X, pope, on the liturgical calendar. And so in that sense, even after Pope Benedict resigned, he recognized that he still had a sort of spiritual connection with the church because of this role he'd been asked into in kind of this Petrine office. And trying to explain that to people led to a lot of confusion where they were like, well, are you resigning or not? But he continues, even now that he's dead, to have that kind of connection. I don't know if that makes sense, because I know the idea of communion of saints is something that some Protestants really struggle with. But this idea that as you stand before the presence of God, you continue to intercede for those who've been placed in your care, whether that's, a parent who's died praying for their children who are still on earth, whether that's a pope praying for the church, those kind of things. The connections formed by God and formed by grace and by, all the circumstances of life, those don't just go away once you die. And so we want to acknowledge and respect that as well.
CALive, call back anytime. Joe, we've had a lot of Protestants call the show today. This is really wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. I'm very grateful. So to every Protestant listener, you don't worry. People are always worried, like, oh, I'm not Catholic. Is it okay if I call? And it's like, yes. If only people who are like, I understand 100% of these things and have no questions called in, the show would be terrible.
We don't want those people to call. Right, yeah.
So,
CALive, God bless you, brother. Keep us in your prayers and know that we are praying for you. Elizabeth in Indiana, watching on Catholic.com. How can we help?
Hi, Joe, I'm reading Who Am I, Lord, right now. I really like it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question, though. So I am currently I'm placed in a public school, and I'm with first graders, and one of my 6-year-old students keeps asking me, why did Jesus die? And he's practically begging me, and I don't know what to say in the context of the public school. And a friend told me I could say, Catholics believe, or like Catholics like me believe, but then even if I did say that, I wasn't quite sure how to fill in the blank. So do you have any advice?
Yeah, so I don't think you have to worry that the kid's a narc. No, I'm just kidding. He's undercover. He's working for the government trying to entrap you. No, as a teacher, you have a great deal of, I think, leeway to respond, like you said, with a Catholic say, or, some people believe, and Catholics like me believe, those kind of things where you're actually answering a question raised by the child. You're not just imposing your own views. Like, you're allowed as a teacher to respond to student questions. And it might be that the distorted version of this that goes home leads some people to speak out and to maybe criticize what you've done. Then say you should be prepared for whatever blowback you get. But I think you should have especially in this case, since you know the question's coming, you should have some sense of how you want to answer that with those kind of caveats. Like Catholics like me believe, and then be prepared to stand by that answer.
Elizabeth, we got to take that hard break. Appreciate your question. If Joe has anything more to add on the second half of the show there, we'll be sure to include that. Call back anytime, 888-318-7884. Catholic Answers Live, right back after this.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
As Catholic apologetics have gotten stronger, Protestant responses have gotten stronger as well. And now they have their own answers to rebut the standard Catholic proofs. Don't fret, we've got you covered. In his new book, Meeting the Protestant Response, apologist Carlo Broussard gives well-reasoned biblical answers to Protestant comebacks. Order your copy of Meeting the Protestant Response today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
(888) 318-7884. Chris Check sitting in for CALive, Catholic Answers Live, open forum. My guest, Joe Heschmeyer, Sean, Carol, Donnie, Timmy. We're going to get to all your questions. Joe, in the first hour, I extended an invitation to all of our listeners to join some of us here on the Catholic Answers staff to make the total consecration to Jesus through Mary as prescribed by Saint Louis de Montfort. I know Maximilian Kolbe has a similar exercise. This is a 33-day exercise. We're starting it on February 20th and ending on the 25th. So you want to end on a Marian feast. When you do this, we're going to end on Annunciation. And really good practice anytime, but now especially a good opportunity during Lent to get closer to Our Lady, and with the goal, of course, getting closer to our Lord. But you've done it, because you've got the chain.
Yeah, I did the Michael Gately version, 33 Days to Morning Glory.
Oh, is that the easy version?
Yeah, it is. I mean,
okay, Father Michael Gately.
I didn't choose it.
No, Father Michael Gately, if you're listening, God bless you. Thank you. I thought
it was great. I liked it so much that
he uses some of Kolbe in his as well.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
So, and what he does, he looks at Montfort, he looks at John Paul II, he looks at Kolbe, and he looks at Mother Teresa.
Right.
And looks at the point that I think he's trying to make is growing closer to Mary actually makes you closer to Jesus.
Yes.
Because the question people always have is, if I have a devotion to Mary, won't that draw me away from Jesus? And I've never encountered a person yet who that was true of.
No.
I've never met a person who, they were like, I loved Jesus, but now that I met his mom, it's like, no, because if you have an authentic relationship with Mary, the last words she has in the gospel are do whatever he tells you. And she's always pointing people to Jesus. And so you look at these real life examples of people who were fanatically in love with Mary, and they were even more fanatically in love with Jesus. And so you just think, okay, well, that's kind of the proof, the proof of the things in the pudding. That's the pudding. Here are saints who really live by this. And I think that's the point of what Gately's doing. Not just showing, here's how to be close to Mary, but in doing this, you don't have to freak out that you're going to suddenly lose a personal relationship with Jesus.
So the devotion goes back, of course, several centuries, back to Louis de Montfort and others. And so he's 17th century, right? 18th century? 17th?
I thought 17th. Now you got me second guessing. I think you're probably 18th.
But John Paul II breathed new life into it, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Like even the Totus Tuus. He was born in 1773. He died in 1716. So he lived about an equal number of years in the 17th and 18th century.
So yeah, all right. So, but like I say, during his papacy, Totus Tuus comes from this consecration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The totally yours.
All yours.
Yeah. And that's something that, when you first hear that totally yours is Mary, you think, oh, wait a second, shouldn't that be Jesus? And it's like, it's not an either or. That God is made glorious in his saints. And so what does it look like to live because it's the heart of this, and this is something I think Americans in particular struggle with, Catholic and Protestant alike, that we want the shepherd without the other sheep. We want the head without the body. And so we want the son without his mother. And we're constantly trying to separate Jesus from his people, from his church.
Yes.
And Jesus doesn't want to be decapitated. He does not want the head removed from the body. And so Marian consecration is a really embodied kind of Christianity.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something to that. And so I would just say, for anyone who's maybe squeamish about it, Gately's book might be a really good thing to pick up. Or you could just dive both feet in to St. Louis de Montfort.
We're using a translation from de Montfort Press by Father Hugh Gillespie, which Siobhan looked up the etymology of Gillespie. Do you know what it means?
No.
It means bishop's servant.
Does it really?
Did you know that
we're on Catholic
Answers 2020 Gillespie Way?
Wow.
And we've been here for more than 15 years, and we're on the road called Bishop's Servant.
That's beautiful. Hindsight is 2020, I guess.
It's so beautiful. Well, I just want to extend an invitation to any one of our listeners, or all of our listeners, if you want to join the Catholic Answers staff starting February 20th. Like I say, we're using this translation by Father Hugh Gillespie from de Montfort Press, but you can use whichever one you want. If you want to really, really dive in, Angelus Press has a superb one, but I think you can't have a daytime job and do that one. There's like 4 meditations a day. So we picked this one because the language is modern. It's been updated. It's nice, clear, concise prose, and it's something you can get done in with an extra 15 or 20 minutes a day. But if you do decide to join us, as Joe invited in the last hour, send a note to radio@catholic.com and say, hey, yeah, my name is Susan in Nashville, and I'm going to be joining you. Or if, in fact, your name is Susan.
You can't all say Susan in Nashville. We'll get suspicious.
Yes, that's right. And let us know if, in fact, you're
I
going to
identify as Susan in Nashville.
Or if you're going to renew. Maybe many of you have done this before, but I'm 57. I've never done it, and I realize I'm way overdue. So join us. Sean in Port Perry, Canada, listening on Alexa. Now, Alexa is not a station. It's a thing that connects you to a station, right?
I don't understand how Alexa works, but yes.
Maybe you can clarify, Sean, how you're actually listening to the program, but let us help you.
One of the best things about Alexa is that one can purchase books from Amazon in Kindle format, and she will narrate them.
Oh,
so
God
for
bless
someone
her.
like me who is blind,
Right.
I have access to an absolute wealth of Catholic literature that I've never had in previous years. I'm 70 years old now. I wish this thing had been around for decades.
Yeah, glory.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, wait, let me try something real quick. Alexa, please buy Pope Peter. Did that work?
She's in the other room.
Oh, okay. You got away with it this time, Sean. Maybe every listener. We'll see. So we might get some angry emails. I don't know if that worked.
Yeah, because Sky's always doing that to me whenever whenever I call in, he yells something at Alexa.
That's hilarious. I know a sister, Alexa, who I think it's been difficult for her.
I want to ask a question in regard to the founder of the Society of St. Pius X, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, wrote a book
spoken like a
just
Canadian.
after Vatican II called J'accuse. And one of his major arguments was that in inaugurating the Novus Ordo Mass, the Catholic Church was actually aping Protestant church services. And I'm curious to know why he would have said that and what the Catholic Church responds to that with.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to do a very superficial job. That's going to be my warning because it's a really nuanced and complicated issue. Because first, you have the changes at the Second Vatican Council. The first major document is the Apostolic Constitution on the Liturgy, and almost every bishop in attendance votes to implement some liturgical changes. They were viewed as long overdue. There is a sense that there hadn't been good organic development in the liturgy. So that's one thing. And I believe Lefebvre was in attendance and voted for it. But then the second thing is how those changes were actually implemented in the aftermath of the council years later. And that became a much more controversial issue that a lot of people would say, yeah, we're pro making some reforms in liturgy. And then they saw the reforms and thought, it's not what we were trying to do. Or some of them liked it, some of it didn't. And so those became a lot more controversial. And so when there were kind of trial runs of the liturgical reforms, those proved to be much more controversial than the initial should we make some liturgical changes kind of question. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there was very much in the spirit of Vatican II, and I know it's a controversial phrase, but a sense of what is the good that we can recognize and affirm within Protestantism and within Orthodoxy to try to bring about Christian unity. Where can we find common ground and where can we build from that common ground? Rather than just condemning what do they get wrong, we can also affirm what do they get right and what can we build on there. And those two things should always be held in balance, right? Like you don't want to just pretend that everything the person you disagreed with on believes is wrong. Because a lot of what they believe is right. They believe Jesus is Lord. Well, great. We believe in that too. And that is not a small thing to believe in. And so there was this sense, even liturgically, are there ways that we can bend? Not to do an injustice to the Mass, but I'll give you one concrete one. The Our Father, at the conclusion of it, Protestants say, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Not all Protestants, but a lot of Protestants do that. Catholics historically have not. That prayer, though, goes back to the Didache in the first century. It's absolutely of antiquity, of tradition in that sense. And so we incorporated that prayer under a different translation at the end of the Our Father, but there's a little prayer in the middle to show that we don't think it's part of the Our Father, but we still want to affirm and recognize it. So we tried to do things like that. I think in the pro column, there was a sense in which Catholics and Protestants started to recognize each other as brother Christians at a deeper level. At the con column, in many cases, the way this was implemented did seem like we were just aping what Protestants were doing better. And again, a lot of that depends on what did your local parish look like? How did it kind of implement the liturgical reforms? So, I mean, again, this is a much more complicated question than I can do justice to. But I think those are some of the kind of things going on and why I think this is something that should be handled kind of carefully in a nuanced way and in a way in which I think most people, both defending and attacking, maybe don't give it the nuanced treatment that it deserves.
Sean, I would like to let you follow up, but I have a queue behind you, and I want Joe to be able to get to them. Is that okay for now?
Absolutely. I can call again. Thanks.
God bless you, brother. Please do. All right. Carol in Indiana on Catholic Radio.
There's been a lot of Indiana, Illinois, and Canada. I love it. It's just like people who in cold places are calling in today.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
sorry.
People who speak French.
Yeah.
Did you hear Sean's?
Yeah, I was very impressed. It sounded very Quebecois.
Quebecois.
Yeah.
Carol in Indiana, Catholic Radio Indy. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is, in the book Story of a Soul, St. Therese of Lisieux, if I understand it correctly, she talks about being able to basically bypass or just go straight to heaven by serving your purgatory on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, kind of doing your purification process on earth. I had never heard that from anywhere else, but it makes sense to me. And I just was curious if that's an official teaching of our church. I know she's a doctor of the church, so...
Yeah.
Can I answer this one, Joe?
Yeah, please.
The answer is yes, Carol. Yeah.
There we go. All right, next one. Because...
And by the way, that's great news.
It is fantastic news.
Because it's better here.
It's like paying off your credit card bills. The sooner you do it, the better.
Yep.
And paragraph 1030 of the Catechism says that all who die in God's grace and friendship, but still imperfectly purified, are indeed assured of their eternal salvation. But after death, they undergo purification so as to achieve the holiness necessary to enter the joy of heaven. And Therese's point is, don't aim at that. Like, that's aiming too low. It's like saying, what do I have to do to pass the class where if I take summer school, I'll be able to graduate? It's like, why would that be what you're aiming for? Instead, aim to excel. And so, you know, there's that important caveat in 1030, but still imperfectly purified. And I think she would say, don't settle for imperfect purification. Be perfectly purified now out of love for Jesus, and you don't have to worry about purgatory at all.
How's that, Carol?
That's perfect.
Carol, if you give your address, to Edgar, we're going to send you a copy of Carla Broussard's book on purgatory.
Purgatory is for real.
Yeah, which is the good news. The good news. What's the subtitle? I don't know. It's a great book. You'll love it.
I just looked at it earlier this afternoon, and I'm blanking on the subtitle.
Let's take a break here before we do. Joe, have you made a contribution to indulgences yet?
I have, although I was not aware I was doing so at the time.
Oh.
I asked, Thomas asked me to write something. I wrote it. It was too long, which is always what happens.
So many of you
and he turned it into a podcast or a blog post.
Many of you listening know Thomas Graff.
Yes,
Thomas Graff wears a beanie hat indoors.
He's not the only one today, though.
I see. Well, Darren, I give him a pass.
He's wearing a Chiefs beanie.
He is, yes, but Darren is a grown-up.
I see what you're doing there.
No, well, Thomas is too. Well, Thomas is getting married soon.
He will be a grown-up soon if he's not yet.
Yeah, that marriage grows you up.
Yeah.
Thomas Graff is our social media czar.
Mm-hmm.
Can you be a czar and still wear a beanie? I think
czars are famous for having interesting hats, so I feel like maybe.
All right. And he now has been given additional responsibilities at Catholic Answers, including the curating, the management, the editorial oversight of a new feature of Catholic Answers magazine online called Indulgences, which are short takes, 200 to 500 words, on things going on in the world and how it relates to you and your Catholic faith. So my friends, check out our new blog, Indulgences. I have one on there called Bloody Reminders about Jose Sanchez del Rio, one of the martyrs of the Cristero War, saying everyone who says it can't happen here hasn't really paid attention to history. Visit Indulgences at Catholic.com/magazine. Catholic Answers Live, right back after this.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
One time somebody said to me, "Why don't you air these people?" And I said, "No, because I don't think they're Catholic." He says, "By what right do you have to say that?" I said, "I own the network."
Mother Angelica Live Classics. Tomorrow night, 8 Eastern on EWTN Television and Radio.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Catholic Answers Live, lightning round. Chris Check sitting in for CALive, Joe Heschmeyer. Timmy in Indiana, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. What's your question, my friend?
Hey, Chris, Joe, thank you guys for taking the call. Appreciate it. Just had a dinner with the wife, and something interesting came up about Lent. So basically, I didn't know that the abstaining from meat on Fridays is a mortal sin if you don't do it. So my question is, my wife's question is, why did the church define that to be a mortal sin? And then from my end, how does that work if you truly don't feel like it's that grave of a matter?
Great.
Like if I'm objectively, I know that it's a mortal sin because the church says it is, but subjectively, I truly am not convinced, I guess personally, that if I died after eating meat on Friday, I would go to hell.
You're asking a very important question, Tim.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's really two parts to it. First, why is this something the church takes really seriously? I'd give two answers. One, the Friday thing is obviously a reminder of the Lord's passion, that we commemorate Good Friday, and we do that really all year round, but in a special way during Lent. And so that's really an important thing. Second, I would say even sociologically, there's a reality that when you're bound together by a common penance, it actually does a lot for the unity of the church. And I experienced this. I went to Georgetown, and so I saw a lot of observant Jews, and which, if you've been there, that makes more sense than if you just hear those two facts unrelatedly. And I was really impressed by the way that keeping kosher kept people connected, even if they maybe didn't practice the other parts. There was something to that. In the same way that a uniform keeps you connected, and think about all the military discipline, everything else. There are ways that you build up a sense of fraternity and camaraderie, that you have this spiritual penance, but it's important that it's not just an individual act, it's a communal act. This is something that both draws you closer to Christ, but also is something we're doing collectively as a church. The mean girls who wear pink on Wednesday, all of these things that just at a human level, this binds us together. So a person who knows that this is true and intentionally flaunts it and flaunts the authority of the church is severely doing damage both to their relationship with the church and their relationship with Christ. Not because there's anything inherently wrong with eating meat, in the same way that if you drive through a red light, it's not that red light in particular has some effect that it just makes cars stop. It's like, no, you're actually undermining the order of things because you know the meaning of this and are continuing to flaunt it. That this is, the lawful authority has said, stop on red. You decide to drive through instead. You're in trouble. The lawful authority said, don't eat meat on Friday. You decided to do it anyway. You're in trouble. There's a good reason for it. The authority has put it in place, and then to just ignore it. And so to just say, to me, it's not a big deal would be like if you get pulled over for running the red and say, I don't find that to be a traffic offense. And I think the officer would say, that's not a super important question, whether you find that to be a traffic offense or not, because you're not the lawgiver. Yeah, here's your ticket. I'll see you in court in a few weeks. Does that make sense? Does that help? That this is something that you didn't choose for yourself, and that's actually good and important. Because penance like this, you think back to the book of Jonah, the king calls a fast, because this is something that people can do together.
Did you get on it? We're on right now. Yeah, no, that makes sense. My wife she was putting down the baby, so she just popped up.
Oh no, I understand. Sense. We've got a third on the way.
No, all good. But to the point of I know one of the conditions for mortal sin is that you have to know it's serious. So if I said, objectively, I know the church declares this is serious enough to be a mortal sin. But it's not from a subjective standpoint.
Right. It's not really just do I do. It doesn't matter if I feel like it. It doesn't matter if it feels good to sin. It doesn't matter if it feels it doesn't feel like a big deal. That's not what's being asked. It's, well, do you know better? And in the case where you do know better and decide to do it anyway, that's where you're on ground.
Timmy, let me refer you to an excellent piece by our chaplain, Father Sam Keyes, that was just posted on Catholic.com last week on the merits of obedience. And he gets to the heart of a great quote from, I don't think he quotes Chesterton here, but Chesterton says, obedience isn't really obedience except in those occasions when, you disagree or when you don't, or when it doesn't make sense to you, or particularly is in those cases. So I refer you to that piece at Catholic.com. Let's go to Mike in Green Bay. 2 calls from Green Bay today, watching on YouTube. Mike, welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Mike, we got about 5 minutes left in the show, so try to give me a quick question.
Well, I just wanted to let you know that I had dinner with the bishop this weekend, and he really is a great guy.
Okay, so Mike, I said, give me a quick question, and you absolutely disobeyed me. But, nonetheless,
I didn't even hear a question mark in your opening comments.
This is a very forgiving program. What's your question, brother?
I am a parent of a teenager who has gone through an awful lot between moving and changing schools and COVID and lockdowns and all of that, and she's really having some issues with her faith.
Sure.
And it wasn't able to be reinforced with activities with her youth group or any of that, because the youth groups all got shut down, and now the youth groups aren't coming back together.
Right.
People and things have gone different directions.
Yeah.
Looking for some suggestions, because it's to the point where Dad doesn't know everything.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, Mike, you're asking a question that lots of parents of 17-year-olds are dealing with right now.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question to answer. Father Sebastian Walsh has a book that we can send you on making sure, trying to safeguard your kid's faith. That he's going to get into more of the details than I can at this point in the show, but I can at least speak in kind of general terms. But before I get there, are there particular questions your daughter's raising? Is it she's doubting the existence of God? Is she doubting something in the Bible? Is she doubting something the Catholic Church teaches? Where does she rub up against?
I think, unfortunately, the path in school has gotten her to look at things like this is what she likes or what she does because she can see it and she understands it. This is, believing in something you can't see and you can't touch and you can't grasp.
I see.
In a physical way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this would help or not, but you can say, do you believe I love you? And, I mean, how do you measure that in a lab? Where do you see that physically?
Well, true enough.
And so I think that would be, if you've got the kind of relationship where you're confident she'd say yes to that question, that can be a good proof. This is something intangible, but it's still real. That there are a lot of things. So the problem here is an error called scientism. It's the idea that all truth is scientific truth and should be measured and tested the way scientific things are measured and tested, using the scientific method in a lab. Well, look, the claim that all truth is scientific truth is not a scientific claim. It's a philosophical claim. So it's self-refuting because you have to believe at least one bit of philosophy, the error of scientism. So everybody believes in some philosophy. There's no such thing as non-philosophers. There's only good and bad philosophers. And so the person who says, I'm only going to live by science is making a philosophical decision, not a scientific one. And so showing that can hopefully create an avenue. Not just like a cheap gotcha, but showing, look, it's impossible to live only by those things that you've proven in a lab. Because even if you're going to live by scientific things, well, which scientists are you trusting? You're not trusting because you've replicated their lab experiments. You're trusting because of their expert testimony, their eyewitnesses. When we talk about Christianity, we're doing the exact same thing. We're saying a person who was in the know, a person who saw this directly, reports this, and I trust their authority. In the same way that if I read a scientific journal, even though there's a replication crisis, even though sometimes journal articles have to be withdrawn because they've been fraudulent, I can still say, I trust their authority and I believe what they're saying. It's the same action in either case, but in one, we also believe that God and not just eyewitnesses is confirming it.
Mike, give your mailing address to Edgar and also give your email. I have a specific resource in Green Bay in mind that may or may not be successful here, but you did mention Dad doesn't know everything, and that's an important insight, because at this point in a kid's life, attaching your daughter to someone that she is going to listen to is going to be a help in this progress. We're out of time, folks. Aiden, please call back. Joe Heschmeyer, great job.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm Chris Check, sitting in for Cy Kellett. Thanks be to God. He'll be back in this chair tomorrow. Catholic Answers Live. God bless you all. Thank you so much.